Local Edge, powered by AdCanada Media.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Local Edge, your show for better understanding and connecting with small communities in Canada. Here, we explore the value of these markets to advertisers, agencies, communities, and more. And over our first season of Local Edge, we've brought you the latest news, insights, and trends from the world of local advertising and marketing. I'm your host, Shawna Randolph. And on today's final show of our first season, we'll be talking to some of the people behind the scenes at AdCanada Media. What was the goal behind this production? How has the feedback been so far? Where do we go from here? So, whether you're an advertiser, agency, community member, or just interested in the world of local advertising, join us right here on Local Edge, a closer look at the power of small communities in Canada.
Not surprisingly, but shelter takes a huge chunk out of the average Canadian household each year. The total rings in at a whopping $20,200 in principal accommodation and also considers other accommodations like hotels. For more data like this and a better understanding of connecting with local markets, please visit AdCanadaMedia.ca.
And joining us on today's episode, we have Jeff Beardsworth, who is CEO and Advertising Director for AdCanada Media. Greg Foster is the Client Services Manager, and Tanis Hutchinson is the Media Placement Services Manager. Thank you, all of you, joining us today. We're going to take a look back, take a look forward. Hi.
Hey, Shawna.
Shawna.
Okay, I want to start with the why, and I'm going to start with you first, Jeff. Why did AdCanada Media want to make the investment in a show about local advertising?
You know, Shawna, there's several reasons why we wanted to go down this road, but if I was to focus on a couple, I guess one of the main ones is, let's face it, universities, colleges, they're not really focusing on traditional media as part of their media courses, their marketing courses anymore. And as a result of that, and we see this, all the time, a lot of the graduates are coming out of these programs are going straight into media jobs with some of Canada's biggest agencies and maybe don't have a full understanding of traditional media, right? So we thought with a platform like this, we might be able to bring on some of Canada's savviest media professionals and get them to kind of do some of that training in real time, right? So that would maybe be the first reason. And the second one kind of builds off of that. But, this narrative that continues to exist out there that traditional media, local media is dying and it's going away. It's not really true. I think really what we're seeing here is kind of a disconnecting of traditional media in big markets, major markets, from that serves smaller communities right across Canada, right? So we also wanted to kind of take a stab at tackling that narrative and come up with a unique way to show that in certain markets in Canada, traditional media is still very important, both to the community, to the advertisers, to the readers. And, we felt like a platform like this might help us to tell some of those stories. So there's a couple of reasons why we wanted to give this a shot.
And you mentioned savvy guests, and they were definitely very savvy. So many stories shared, and we've heard from them about, local newspapers still being relevant. So I'm going to go to you first off here, Tanis, on the perspective here. Why do you feel that they are still relevant to this day?
Oh, of course. As long as the community exists, the local newspaper will be relevant. A community newspaper will always there will always be a need for local information. And that's exactly what the community newspaper brings. It's the hub of everything local content, local connection. So as long as the community is there, a community newspaper will be extremely relevant.
Greg, your thoughts too.
Community news is at the center of where people live. I use the phrase often that we give you the opportunity to reach right into a community's own newspaper. There's a fierce pride in a lot of communities, and often one of the things that communities identify with is their newspaper. So, as Tanis says, as long as there's a community, there will be the community newspaper.
And Jeff, we heard from publishers quite regularly. I mean, I just can't get over the dedication in all of the small markets and all the misconceptions too that they clarified about local newspapers still being relevant, right?
Oh, 100%, Shawna. Like, this is one of the challenges that the newspapers industry has, particularly when it comes to these local markets, is that, and I've got a few here in front of me. These newspapers are, 48, 52, 62 pages. They're filled with content. They're filled with advertising from the local market. And, I think nothing speaks more about the value of the local newspaper than, by just taking a look at one of them and seeing where people are investing their local ad budgets, as a way of kind of reaching out to their customers. So it's interesting and it's frustrating that we can't turn on the news these days without hearing stories about how, local media is under pressure here, there, and everywhere. But you talk to a publisher and they're often like, what's all the fuss about? Like, I'm having a record year this year, or my circulation has grown by 20%. So these stories that we hear really kind of exist in isolation, and they don't apply universally, right across the media. So it's an interesting time that we're in, right? And this is what we're trying to address.
And we heard a couple times about the phones just ringing if the newspaper did not show up on someone's doorstep on the Wednesday that they expect it. And that was one of the things that really resonated with me, of that misconception cleared up. Another thing I want to focus on here is this transition to online media consumption. And again, we heard from the publishers, we heard from the advertising specialists, but what is AdCanada's viewpoint on this? Greg, to you.
Well, Shawna, computers and the internet have changed the way we do things, no matter where you live. There's no doubt about that. But when we look at the way media is consumed in rural communities, it's not quite the revolution that gets talked about with digital everything replacing traditional everything. Outside the biggest cities, it's more like an evolution. Growth in digital media is happening, but it's slower. And for lots of reasons that are particular to the nature of smaller, more remote communities, local residents trust and rely on their local media first and foremost. And at the same time, they've learned other websites, other sources, social media sources can sometimes be unreliable or not applicable in their area at all. So in newspapers, we see, yes, there's more online readership happening. In fact, it's the most measurable growth in local readership that we see. But it's actually the digital version of the printed newspaper that's showing the most measurable growth. And a case in point might be, we heard in a previous episode, Lana Meyer, a publisher from Manitoba, talking in glowing terms about the growth of her online readership. And I wondered at the time if viewers would understand Lana's website really contains simply the digital version of her printed newspaper. That's what's getting the readership. And that's a measurable trend that we do see. So yes, it's growing. It's not quite the narrative where digital everything is taking over. And in fact, it's growing in ways that maybe don't quite line up with the global giants and the frameworks that they like to see used.
Greg, that's an interesting point. And I think it's worth re-emphasizing that when you talk to, because it's kind of representative too of how publishers of newspapers in smaller communities look at things a little bit differently than those who live in larger communities. Because if we were talking to, and we talked a lot to small publishers or small town publishers, previous episodes of Local Edge, their context for a website presence is taking their printed newspaper, turning it into an e-reader edition, and posting that on their website, which is very different than what we see in a lot of large urban communities, where their online presence is posted content on a website where you kind of click and read, take that kind of approach. But to a publisher in a small town who sees or believes that they are transitioning rather to an online presence, what they're actually transitioning to is an e-reader model where people who live in these towns who want the traditional newspaper flipping experience are getting that, but they're getting it on their computer rather than reading the printed version of the newspaper, right? So it's just interesting to sit and watch this juxtaposition between what's happening with online transition in a big city like Edmonton and a smaller community like perhaps Moosomin.
Okay, we talked about trends a lot this season. Now I want to talk about advice from the three of you. This is going to be kind of an around the table, around the screen part I want to do here, hearing from each of you separately. I want to hear one piece of advice that you'd like to share with advertisers with respect to advertising in local markets. I'm going to go to you first, Tanis.
Hyper-localize your message. Include a community name in your advertisement so you feel and look like you're talking right to the community. Throw a Boulder into your message if you're running in the Boulder Gazette. Feel like you're speaking right to the readers. We've had some amazing campaigns where the media buyers and planners we've been working with understand that taking a canned ad that ran in the National Post will not resonate the same way in our rural markets. We've had publishers actually actively involved with helping these media planners and buyers plan and execute an effective community newspaper campaign by taking a picture of the big Easter egg in Vegreville?
The Pysanka
in Vegreville. It was an integral part of an agricultural ad, actually. It had the advertiser speaking right to the readers of the Vegreville community newspaper with a big picture of their iconic landmark. So my best piece of advice, and I love when media buyers and planners pick up on this, hyper-localize your ad. Don't treat it like a big city, a big market advertisement. Treat it like the medium that you're buying. It's a local community newspaper. Speak right to your audience.
Okay.
My best piece of advice.
Hyper-localize. All right, Greg, you.
Appreciate that these markets are unique unto themselves, and they're all different. If you've devised a plan to cover cities and intend to just spill the same message and the same technique into the rurals, you're going to miss critical reach. It's worthwhile to consider them individually. And Tanis's point about localizing your content is brilliant. And I guess I'm taking a step back and looking more at the very beginning of the planning process. Tune in to these communities and realize you've got the opportunity to actually show up in a tangible, visible way right in the community's own newspaper.
Okay. Jeff.
You know what? Same kind of idea as Greg. Get to know the markets that you're planning, right? And that's one of the challenges of planning local traditional media, whether it's newspapers or radio stations. A lot of this planning is happening out of big cities, out of Toronto, out of Montreal or Vancouver. A lot of these planners really have no affinity whatsoever for the markets they're planning. So my advice would be to get to know the market, get to know the media that's available in these markets, see where the local advertisers are investing their local budgets, because there's no better indicator as to where you should be spending your client's ad money than by looking to see what's happening in the market directly and where those ad dollars are being spent, because the local advertisers know the market better than anybody. They're not going to be spending their comparatively small budgets in media that doesn't really offer a return on an investment, right? So look at what the local market is doing with their ad budgets and kind of mimic that, and you won't go wrong.
I could just add to that too. It's just the third largest community in Manitoba is Steinbach, which is about 15 or 16,000 people in their service area. The third largest community in Ontario is Mississauga. The media consumption in Mississauga is going to be different than the media consumption in Steinbach. So yeah, once again, mimic what Jeff is saying, is understand how media is consumed in these markets that you're buying. They're going to be consumed differently, and speak to them like they're like the unique markets that they are.
Perfect. I'm glad you mentioned that. And then with that, transitioning here in this way, just examples any of you have, maybe you can think of that, what newspapers are doing right that might be of interest to advertisers.
I love the special sections that they put together. They put a variety of sections out throughout the course of the year, and they bring readers and local businesses together in a very unique local way. And I love these special sections because they tend to have a little bit more longevity than the weekly community newspaper. They tend to be held back out of the paper, not recycled when the next one comes in. They tend to hang around a coffee table at the house because the longevity that these these special sections have, and the connection. Again, it's all about connection and connection to your local communities, your local market, and that's exactly what these special sections do. And there's a variety of them all year: golf, ag, graduation, bridal, financial. The list goes on. The list goes on.
Jeff, Greg, anybody?
Well, I guess to build on what Tanis is talking about, because content is so important. Content absolutely is king. And when a paper can generate content that plays into a newspaper's or into an advertiser's narrative, that's great. But I kind of want to take a step back and look at it more from a meat and potatoes standpoint. And that is, if the question is what are community papers doing that are of interest to advertisers, the fact that week in, week out, day in, day out, month after month, they're there minding the community, the town council, the county, the municipal decisions that are being made. It's not necessarily sexy. It's not particularly interesting or relevant outside of hometown. But once you own property in a community or your kids are going to school, you're paying attention to that. There's nobody else doing it to that degree. And that is something that newspapers really do offer an advertiser that's completely unique.
So we've heard a lot through the season about the research that is done by advertisers, but let's talk about the research. This is to you now, Jeff. The research that AdCanada is doing. Give us a little thought there.
You're exactly right, Shawna. Research is critical, right? And maybe even in a world or an era where data is the new gold, it's critically important that agencies, media companies are investing in research that proves that the investments that clients are making in your platform are actually worthwhile, right? And they're worth, and we're talking in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've got to be able to justify that kind of investment is the right thing to be doing, right? So AdCanada does invest biannually in media studies to kind of make sure that we're staying on top of what the trends are, what platforms are still being referred to, what platforms are still relevant. We've taken a little bit of a different approach, though, with our research, because as we've mentioned, previously today, and we've heard many times throughout the course of the series, urban markets and rural markets are very different in terms of their traditions, their habits, how they do things. In a lot of these markets, Shawna, people have to drive a half an hour to buy a liter of milk, right? So they are different. They are different than people who live in larger urban centers. So we want our research to reflect that, right? We want to make sure that we're looking at different markets, the sizes of the markets, and say, okay, how do farmers consume media? How do farmers shop? What things do farmers look for in terms of media choices? Then we go up and say, okay, now if we want to look at communities between 10 and 30,000, how do those people consume media? What are some of their traditions? What things do they spend their money on? What do their shopping habits look like? Then we go up into the next category of communities that are maybe 50,000 to 100,000 population, and isolate those folks to determine, okay, what are their habits? What do they like to read? What do they like to listen to? How much time do they spend on social media? So, at the end of the day, we're left with a package of research that allows us to say, okay, this is what people in big cities tend to do. This is what people in medium-sized cities tend to do. This is what people in small towns tend to do. And this is what farmers tend to do. So, the research kind of reflects the reality. And the reality, at least in our opinion, is that depending on where you live, you're very likely to be doing something a little bit differently than in the community 20 miles down the road. So let's dig into that and learn as much as we can about what you do.
Okay, so then I want to bounce off of that then, Jeff, to Tanis and Greg. Then with that research, what type of advertisers do you feel are a good fit for community newspapers?
I believe everybody is a good fit for community newspapers. They are consumers, they're voters, they're business owners, they're invested in their community, they're shareholders, they're volunteers, they're teachers, they're professionals. So take a look at your community newspaper, because it is what it is. It's a community all in itself.
Greg.
I think Tanis has hit the nail on the head here. At the moment you need to support activities in a community, bricks and mortar locations or remote sales agents, the moment you need to communicate with volunteers or stakeholders or adjust political points of view, reach right into the community and influence people, you are a good prospect for community newspaper advertising. Or if you're an agency that has been challenged by your client to accomplish some of these goals, likewise, you should probably talk to us, because we can help. This is what we do, is help to align the need to reach people in specific areas or specific types of people in who knows what areas, reach them in the most meaningful ways.
Okay, so to Jeff, what do you feel are the best types of advertisers that are a good fit for AdCanada Media?
Well, I tell you, Shawna, and I mentioned it earlier in the show, but young planners who are coming right out of school and being put in these significant positions in, again, some of Canada's biggest agencies might look at local media as, something that they can see the value in, kind of, right? But at the end of the day, it's a very daunting media to try and pull together a plan for. It's still Canada's largest mass media. There's all sorts of players involved, in the, I'll talk about the newspapers industry in Canada. We never want a media planner to say, God, I like the idea of advertising locally, but I have no time to be making 100 different phone calls to people I don't know who they are. I don't know really what they do. I'm just going to do something a little bit easier. So really the best kind of client for AdCanada Media is someone who sees a little bit of value in local media, doesn't really have the time to invest, and wants to go somewhere that can pull the whole project together for them. So at the end of the day, they can sit back, look at a recommendation, look at the research, look at the supporting data, and say, you know what? This looks like something I do want to pursue. So I can simply say that the best client for AdCanada would be someone who sees potential value in a media platform, a local media platform, but is scared off by the time it might take to actually pursue the opportunity. And I know from experience, I've had clients tell me, oh my God, if you guys didn't exist, I would not be looking at local media. And I think Tanis has probably heard that before. Greg, I know you've heard that before. So we know that there are opportunities out there. I guess at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that those opportunities aren't being missed because a planner is scared off by what looks to be on the surface, perhaps a pretty challenging exercise.
And I'm so glad that we were able to really connect with the three of you, Jeff, Tanis, and Greg, so that your clients, current and potential new ones, can learn more about the whole landscape. And I just want to wrap up. Jeff, really quickly, this has been a wonderful first season. We have a season 2 coming up. Tell us what we can expect.
Well, I tell you more of the same. Let's face it, right? Let's be honest. Things do not stay the same in the media industry these days for too long, right? So, yes, we're looking at season 2. I would say that we're planning more of the same, Shawna. Looking for the stories that need to be told, getting information out there, getting misinformation kind of clarified a little bit. As Canada's media industry becomes more complex, more complicated, there are more players involved. We need to make sure that we've got a platform available that allows us to come out and say, okay, well, here's a trend, here's an evolution, here's the leading edge of a wedge on something that may be looking like it's coming down the pipe. Here's our side of the story on that, right? And that's kind of what we're envisioning right now for season 2. More of the same, telling more of the stories, getting more experts involved, and to provide, a bit of a forum that helps people who may not understand local media learn a little bit more about what it's all about, right? That's really what we're trying to do.
And I love pulling the stories out of all the guests, so keep them coming for season 2. And thank you, the three of you. I really appreciate your time with us today.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Shawna.
Jeff Beardsworth, he is the CEO and Advertising Director, and Greg Foster, Client Services Manager for AdCanada Media, and Tanis Hutchinson is the Media Placement Services Manager.
Do you sell sports, athletic, and recreation equipment? Do you know the average expenditure per household in Canada is $223? In some areas of the country, it's over 40% higher. For targeted data like this and to get a better understanding of connecting with local markets, please visit AdCanadaMedia.ca.
And that's this show. Thank you so much for spending time with us here on Local Edge, everybody. I'm your host, Shawna Randolph. And this brings us to the conclusion of our first season here on Local Edge, but it doesn't end here. For additional information and extended interviews, be sure to subscribe to the Local Edge podcast on any of the major platforms, Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever you use. And don't forget to check out our website, AdCanadaMedia.ca. That's AdCanadaMedia.ca. Thank you for joining us for season 1, everybody. Goodbye from all of us here at the Local Edge, and see you soon.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, check our website, www.road55.ca.